Kevin Stefanski thought the move to Atlanta would feel like a reset button. New city, new roster, new opportunity. But what he's learning right now is something every NFL coach eventually understands. You can change your address, but you can't outrun your reputation. The moment news broke that he was stepping into a leadership role with the Atlanta Falcons, the excitement should have been front and center. Instead, the first wave of conversation wasn't about schemes or playoff projections. It was about Cleveland. More specifically, it was about what happened between Stefanski and Shedeur Sanders. The past didn't just follow him, it arrived before he did. Around the league, whispers started circulating almost immediately. Not official statements, not press releases, just quiet questions. Was this the same coach critics accused of mishandling a rising quarterback? Was Atlanta bringing in stability or importing unfinished drama? Fair or unfair, that narrative attached itself to his name before he even set foot inside the Falcons building. And here's the uncomfortable part. Perception in today's NFL can be just as powerful as reality. Players talk, agents talk, trainers talk. The offseason isn't silent anymore. It's filled with group chats, workout meetups, and behind-the-scenes conversations that never make it to broadcast television. By the time Stefanski shook hands in Atlanta, many players already had opinions, some neutral, some cautious, some skeptical. Because, in Cleveland, the story spiraled fast. Fans online framed it as sabotage. Analysts debated system fit. Supporters defended coaching philosophy. Critics called it ego. Regardless of which side you land on, one thing became undeniable. The situation created a cloud. And in a league where trust inside a locker room is everything, clouds matter. Imagine walking into a new team meeting knowing that half the room has already read headlines questioning your judgment. Imagine addressing star players who've watched viral clips dissecting your decisions frame by frame. That tension doesn't show up on stat sheets, but it lives in body language, in eye contact, in how quickly players buy into your message. And that's exactly why this move feels different. Because Atlanta isn't just rebuilding a roster, it's balancing a narrative. The Falcons have invested heavily in young offensive weapons, a team built around potential, around growth, around empowering their franchise leaders. So when a coach arrives carrying accusations, even unproven ones, about limiting a young quarterback's development, players naturally start connecting dots. Right or wrong, that question floats in the air. If it happened there, could it happen here? What makes this even more intense is the timing. The NFL is shifting into a new era. Quarterbacks aren't just athletes anymore. They're brands. They're cultural figures. They command massive online followings and influence locker room energy. And the player at the center of the Cleveland controversy wasn't just any rookie. He carried one of the most recognizable last names in football. That amplified everything. The move to Atlanta was supposed to silence the noise. Instead, it might have amplified it. Because now the conversation isn't confined to one franchise, it's league-wide. When Stefanski enters a press conference, the questions aren't just about formations or tempo, they're layered with subtext. When he interacts with young players, observers aren't just watching development, they're watching dynamics. And here's the deeper issue no one says out loud. Trust in an NFL locker room is fragile. Coaches can lose it before they ever officially earn it. It doesn't take a losing season. It doesn't take a public blow-up. Sometimes it only takes perception. Right now, Atlanta is standing at a crossroads. Stefanski has the chance to flip the narrative entirely. A strong start rewrites the storyline. Clear communication rebuilds confidence. Winning erases doubt. But if early friction surfaces, even small cracks, the Cleveland chapter won't be treated like old news. It'll be treated like foreshadowing. The Falcons didn't just hire a coach, they inherited a storyline. And whether that storyline becomes redemption or confirmation is about to unfold in real time. To understand why this situation refuses to fade, you have to rewind to Cleveland, because that's where everything shifted. and depending on who you ask, the story sounds completely different. On one side, supporters of Kevin Stefanski argue it was simple football, a head coach running his system, prioritizing structure over hype, choosing the quarterback he believed gave the team the best schematic fit. No drama, no agenda, just coaching decisions. On the other side, critics insist it felt like something else entirely. When Shedeur Sanders arrived, expectations weren't just high, they were explosive. He wasn't viewed as a developmental backup. He came with confidence, production, and a brand that already commanded national attention. Fans believed he was ready to lead. They believed he should have had full control of the offense early. And when that didn't happen, suspicions started brewing. Reports at the time suggested practice reps were split in ways that raised eyebrows. Observers questioned why Sanders wasn't consistently receiving first-team work. Analysts debated whether the staff trusted him. Online conversations turned heated. Was this patience or hesitation? Development or delay? Then came the Dillon Gabriel factor. When Dillon Gabriel began receiving key opportunities, it intensified the debate. Supporters of the decision argued Gabriel understood the system better. Detractors claimed Sanders' upside was being capped. Social media exploded with side-by-side clips, arm strength comparisons, pocket movement breakdowns. Decision-making threads went viral overnight. And that's when the temperature shifted from discussion to accusation. Fans began using the word sabotage. That's a heavy word, an emotional word. There's no official evidence proving intentional harm, but perception. Perception doesn't require proof. It thrives on patterns. Every missed rep, every benching after a mistake, every press conference answer that felt vague. To some viewers, it formed a narrative that was difficult to unsee. It didn't help that when Sanders flashed brilliance, tight window throws, off-script creativity, late-game composure, the praise sometimes felt muted compared to the criticism after mistakes. Critics online pointed out what they viewed as a double standard. They argued other young quarterbacks around the league received longer leashes. They claimed Sanders had to be perfect to keep his spot. Again, supporters of Stefanski pushed back hard. They pointed to turnovers, to missed reads, to growing pains every rookie faces. They argued the situation was being inflated because of Sanders'
popularity and last name. From that perspective, it wasn't sabotage, it was standard NFL accountability. But the conflict didn't stay contained inside football circles. Clips from press conferences went viral. Body language was analyzed frame by frame. Tone was dissected. Phrases like "fit the system" became talking points across podcasts and debate shows. The story outgrew the field. Even local media coverage became part of the conversation. Some fans accused reporters of softening critiques. Others believed they were simply reporting coaching philosophy. That divide fueled even more speculation. And once the narrative reaches that stage, it stops being about X's and O's. It becomes about trust. What truly escalated the controversy wasn't just decisions, it was consistency. When Sanders delivered strong statistical performances but still saw limited authority in certain situations, fans questioned priorities. Was the organization fully committed to him? Or was there internal reluctance that never made it to the public? We don't have documented proof of intention, but what we do have is reaction. And reaction shapes reputations faster than results. By the end of that season, the conversation around Stefanski had changed. He wasn't just being evaluated as a strategist anymore. He was being evaluated as a developer of young talent. Fairly or unfairly, the Cleveland chapter attached a question mark to his ability to manage high-profile quarterbacks. And when that question mark followed him to Atlanta, it didn't arrive quietly. Because in today's NFL, controversies don't expire when contracts do. They linger in highlight reels, in comment sections, in the memory of players watching from across the league. What happened in Cleveland depends on perspective, but one thing is certain: it reshaped how Kevin Stefanski is viewed, and that perception may matter more than ever now. Here's what fans on the outside often underestimate. NFL locker rooms have long memories. Coaches move, front offices shuffle, but players, they remember everything. The league is smaller than it looks on television. Veterans train together in the offseason. Quarterbacks share private throwing sessions. Receivers and defensive backs work camps together every summer. They talk, they compare notes, and when something controversial happens in one city, it doesn't stay there. So when Kevin Stefanski arrived in Atlanta, it wasn't like the Falcons roster was walking in blind. Some fans had watched the Cleveland situation closely. Others had heard about it through friends who were inside that building. And whether the accusations were fair or exaggerated, perception travels faster than official statements ever could. Inside a locker room, trust isn't given because of a resume, it's earned through consistency. That's why even rumors can shift energy. There have been online reports suggesting that certain Falcons players weren't exactly celebrating the hire. For example, social media buzz claimed that wide receiver Drake London paused early extension discussions around the same time the controversy resurfaced. Now, to be clear, there's no
confirmed evidence connecting those two situations, but the fact that fans even made that connection shows how fragile optics can be. Then there's the screenshot that made waves online, involving Bijan Robinson. A post from Shedeur Sanders criticizing the Cleveland narrative gained traction, and fans noticed Robinson had briefly interacted with it before the like reportedly disappeared. Is that proof of internal friction? Not at all. It could mean nothing. But in today's hyper-digital world, even small actions get magnified into statements. And that's exactly the issue. Because when players start worrying about how a coach handles young talent, doubt creeps in quietly. No one storms into meetings and demands answers. It's more subtle than that. It shows up in how quickly buy-in happens during film sessions. It shows up in sideline body language during adversity. It shows up in whether veterans defend the coaching staff publicly without hesitation. Take a player like Kyle Pitts. He's already experienced coaching turnover early in his career. Development instability isn't new to him. So when another shift happens, especially one surrounded by headlines, it's natural for players to wonder how it will affect their trajectory. That doesn't mean there's rebellion, it doesn't mean there's chaos, but it does mean there's caution. And in the modern NFL, caution can be just as dangerous as conflict, because offense thrives on chemistry, on rhythm, on collective belief. A quarterback must trust his coach to empower him. Receivers must trust their routes will be maximized. Running backs must trust the scheme showcases their strengths. If players believe there's even a chance they could be limited because they don't fit the mold, that hesitation lingers. What makes this situation more complex is the broader shift in player power. Today's stars understand their leverage. Contracts are shorter, movement is common. If they sense instability, they don't hesitate to explore options. That doesn't mean Atlanta is on the verge of an exodus, but it does mean leadership matters more than ever. There's also the psychological factor. When one high-profile quarterback becomes the center of a national debate about development and opportunity, other young players take notes. They ask themselves silent questions. If I make a mistake, how long is my leash? If I shine outside the script, will I be embraced or restrained? That's not an accusation against Stefanski, it's a reflection of how narratives ripple. Right now, the Falcons' locker room may not be fractured, but it's observant. Every early decision will be evaluated through the Cleveland lens. Every depth chart move will be interpreted with subtext, and if Stefanski handles it smoothly, he can rewrite the story fast. But locker rooms don't forget easily, and the real test isn't what's said publicly, it's what's believed privately. Because once players start questioning alignment between talent and trust, that's when tension becomes momentum. And in the NFL, momentum spreads quietly, until it doesn't. What made the Cleveland situation even more explosive wasn't just what happened on the field, it was the gap between how it was reported and how players allegedly felt about it. On television, the story often sounded clean. Coaches talked about development timelines, analysts mentioned system fit, reporters framed decisions as strategic patience. From a traditional football lens, everything could be explained. Every reduced rep count had a reason, every quarterback switch had logic behind it. But online, the tone was completely different. Fans dissected every snap involving Shedeur Sanders. They clipped throws, they posted slow-motion breakdowns, they compared his mistakes to the grace other young quarterbacks seemed to receive across the league. And in those spaces, the narrative wasn't about patience, it was about power. Some Cleveland media voices defended Kevin Stefanski heavily, emphasizing long-term growth and minimizing controversy. That's their role, to analyze from inside the building and rely on access-based information. But critics accused portions of local coverage of protecting the organization instead of challenging it. Again, that accusation is based on perception, not proof. Still, perception spreads fast. The disconnect became obvious during post-game press conferences. When Sanders delivered standout moments, the focus often shifted toward what he still needed to improve. When other quarterbacks around the league had uneven stretches, the framing felt softer. That contrast, whether intentional or not, fueled online debates about double standards. Fans began questioning whether Sanders was being judged differently because of his visibility and last name. Meanwhile, players inside the locker room weren't reading box scores the same way fans were. They were watching film. They were seeing who moved the chains. They were feeling who energized the huddle. And when your lived experience doesn't match the public narrative, that creates quiet tension. It's not about open rebellion, it's about trust. If a player feels the media is painting a story that doesn't reflect reality, it changes how they view the organization. If they believe a teammate isn't receiving fair evaluation, they remember it. And while no player openly accused the Browns staff of wrongdoing, social media reactions hinted that not everyone agreed with the public storyline. Then, national outlets amplified the debate. Segments on major platforms questioned quarterback management decisions. Online personalities openly criticized the depth chart. Once that happens, it stops being local speculation and becomes a league-wide conversation. And in the digital era, there's no control switch for narrative momentum. Kevin Stefanski's defenders argued that coaches see what fans don't: practice habits, playbook mastery, leadership behind closed doors. That's valid, but the public only judges outcomes, and outcomes are magnified when a high-profile player is involved. The phrase "coach speak" started appearing more frequently in comment sections. Every careful answer became suspect. Every neutral explanation felt loaded with subtext. The gap between what the organization said and what fans believed widened. And when that gap grows, it doesn't stay confined to one season. Because players around the league watch how narratives are handled. They watch whether coaches publicly support their quarterbacks. They notice body language during interviews. In a world where branding and public perception matter more than ever, how a story is framed can influence how players feel long-term. That's why Atlanta can't treat this as ancient history. The media narrative in Cleveland may have ended with official explanations and standard football language, but the player reality, or at least the perception of it, never fully settled. And now, in a new city, those narratives collide again. The real question isn't whether the media was right or wrong, it's whether players believe the media told the full story. Because once doubt creeps into that equation, it doesn't fade quietly. It waits, it watches, and the next difficult decision brings it back to the surface. It might have faded over time. That's how most NFL controversies end. A tough season, a coaching change, a clean slate. But then came the interview. Kevin Stefanski sat down expecting routine off-season questions, new opportunity, fresh start, optimism in Atlanta. Instead, the conversation drifted back to Cleveland. More specifically, it circled straight towards Shedeur Sanders. At first, the tone was standard, measured, professional. But once the interviewer pressed him about how Sanders was handled, about practice reps, about leadership decisions, about public perception, something shifted. Viewers online immediately picked up on it. Not what he said, but how he said it. Clips spread within minutes. Some fans felt he sounded defensive. Others believed he seemed frustrated that the topic wouldn't die. Supporters argued he was simply tired of answering the same question. Critics claimed the discomfort revealed deeper tension. There's no verified proof of any hidden motive, but the optics were powerful. And in today's NFL, optics are everything. Body language analysis flooded social feeds. People pointed to pauses, to changes in tone, to the way certain questions were redirected instead of directly addressed. Again, interpretation isn't fact, but when a narrative already exists, viewers see what they expect to see. The phrase short-circuiting even began trending in comment sections. Now, was Stefanski actually caught off guard? Possibly. Any coach repeatedly questioned about past decisions would be irritated. But instead of closing the chapter, that interview poured fuel on it. Rather than resetting the story, it reopened wounds fans felt were never fully addressed. The most damaging part wasn't any single statement, it was the tone of the exchange. When he reiterated that every move was system-based and team-first, some viewers interpreted it as sidestepping the emotional side of the situation. They weren't looking for playbook explanations, they wanted acknowledgement of how things looked from the outside, and perception won that round.
Former players and analysts chimed in across platforms. Some defended the coach, emphasizing that tough decisions are part of leadership. Others hinted that the handling of Sanders could have been smoother. No one provided explosive new evidence, but debate thrives on suggestion. What made the moment viral wasn't scandal, it was vulnerability. For the first time, Stefanski didn't look untouchable in public discourse. Previously, he was described as composed, strategic, a two-time Coach of the Year figure who rarely let emotion show. That interview cracked that image, even slightly. And once an image cracks, every future appearance is scrutinized harder. In Atlanta, that pressure multiplies. Every press conference now carries a second layer. Reporters know the topic generates engagements. Fans watch closely for consistency. And players, they observe whether their coach handles controversy with calm or conflict. Because leadership isn't judged only during wins, it's judged when narratives turn hostile. That interview didn't confirm sabotage, it didn't expose secrets. What it did was remind everyone that the Cleveland chapter still lives in the public mind. It made it clear the story isn't fully buried. And instead of stepping into Atlanta quietly, Stefanski stepped in with cameras waiting. Now the stakes feel higher, because if the Falcons start strong, that interview becomes a footnote. But if there's early turbulence, those clips resurface instantly. And in a league driven by momentum, the difference between redemption and reinforcement can hinge on moments like that. One uncomfortable exchange, one viral afternoon, and suddenly the past feels present again. While the debate swirled around coaching decisions and press conferences, the most unexpected twist in this entire saga came from the one person at the center of it all. Shedeur Sanders didn't go on a media tour, he didn't drop cryptic posts, he didn't fire back in interviews. He went quiet, and that silence might have been the loudest move of all. In an era where athletes respond instantly to criticism, Sanders chose patience. No public feuds, no headline-chasing soundbites. When reporters tried to bait him into revisiting Cleveland, he kept it professional. He focused on growth, opportunity, and preparation, and that composure changed the power dynamic almost overnight. Because when one side looks defensive and the other looks disciplined, perception tilts. Fans began noticing it immediately. Instead of feeding drama, Sanders posted training clips, film study sessions, workouts with teammates. Every video felt intentional without being reactive. It projected stability, control, maturity. Whether that was strategic branding or genuine personality, the effect was undeniable. The narrative slowly shifted from "was he sabotaged" to "he might have outgrown the situation entirely." And that's where things get interesting. Controversy can crush young quarterbacks. Confidence can erode under constant speculation. But in this case, the scrutiny seemed to strengthen his platform. His fan base didn't shrink, it expanded.
Social engagement numbers climbed, merch interests surged. Even neutral fans began respecting the way he handled adversity. It became less about Cleveland and more about resilience. There's also the legacy factor. Being the son of Shedeur Sanders already placed him under a microscope from day one. Expectations weren't normal rookie expectations, they were magnified. Every move analyzed, every mistake amplified. By staying composed in the middle of controversy, Sanders quietly proved he wasn't just riding a famous last name, he was building his own narrative. Inside league circles, that matters. Teammates respect quarterbacks who don't fracture under pressure. Coaches value players who avoid distraction spirals, and fans gravitate toward athletes who let performance speak louder than interviews. What made this a true power move wasn't aggression, it was discipline. By refusing to escalate the situation, Sanders forced the spotlight elsewhere. Instead of being painted as difficult or dramatic, he appeared steady, focused, almost detached from the chaos around him. And in a media cycle fueled by reaction, that restraint stood out. There's also a branding element that can't be ignored. Modern quarterbacks aren't just field generals, they're multimedia figures. Silence, when strategic, can build mystique. It creates anticipation. When he does speak, people lean in harder. When he performs well, it feels like validation rather than redemption. Meanwhile, every awkward press conference from the other side felt heavier by comparison. Some analysts have pointed out that by not responding emotionally, Sanders avoided giving critics extra ammunition. No quotes to twist, no viral clip to dissect, just tape, just results. And that forces evaluators back to football instead of drama. And here's the twist nobody saw coming. The very situation that critics believed might derail his career may have amplified it, because adversity, handled publicly with poise, builds credibility. It shifts how peers see you. It shapes locker room trust. Players across the league notice who keeps composure when narratives turn hostile. The most powerful message he sent wasn't verbal. It was simple. Keep watching. No retaliation, no bitterness, just forward motion. And now, as Atlanta tries to stabilize under a new coaching regime, the contrast is hard to ignore. One figure looks like he carried drama into a new city. The other looks like he left it behind entirely. That's why this isn't just about football performance anymore. It's about influence. And right now, Sanders' quiet confidence feels louder than any press conference ever could. Atlanta didn't just hire a coach, they made a bet. Not a small one, not a low-risk experiment, a franchise-defining wager. When the Atlanta Falcons brought Kevin Stefanski into the building, they weren't simply adding experience, they were betting that whatever happened in Cleveland was context, not character, philosophy, not pattern. They were betting that perception could be rewritten faster than it spread, and that's a dangerous game in today's NFL. Because this roster isn't neutral ground, it's young, it's talented, it's impatient. Players like Drake London and Bijan Robinson aren't in development purgatory, they're entering their prime windows. They don't want culture experiments, they want clarity, they want alignment. They want to know exactly how they'll be used and empowered. So the gamble isn't just about wins and losses, it's about buy-in. If Stefanski establishes trust immediately, transparent communication, decisive leadership, consistent play calling, this gamble looks brilliant. The narrative flips. Instead of being the coach who mishandled talent, he becomes the coach who evolved. Redemption arcs in the NFL move fast when backed by winning. But if there's early friction, even small things, the Cleveland story roars back. Imagine a slow offensive start. Imagine a young star publicly frustrated with role usage. Imagine a depth chart decision that looks questionable from the outside. In another context, those would be standard growing pains. In this context, they become confirmation bias for critics who already believe a pattern exists. That's the pressure Atlanta signed up for. And the front office knows it. You don't make this kind of hire blindly. They've evaluated the full picture, the Coach of the Year accolades, the playoff appearances, the offensive structure success.
They're betting that system discipline outweighs online narratives. Still, locker rooms aren't spreadsheets. Chemistry doesn't respond to resume bullets. It responds to tone, to consistency, to whether players feel elevated rather than limited. Stefanski's challenge isn't installing an offense, it's re-establishing trust before doubts ever have room to grow. There's also the external factor: fans. Atlanta's fan base has experienced coaching turnover, quarterback uncertainty, and playoff drought tension. Optimism exists, but it's cautious. Early victories could ignite the city, early confusion could spark impatience. And in a digital ecosystem where discourse spreads instantly, momentum shifts fast. This is why the hire feels high stakes, not routine.
The Falcons aren't rebuilding from the ground up. They've assembled skilled pieces. There's visible upside, which means expectations won't be softened. If the offense struggles to unlock its weapons, the finger-pointing will be immediate. At the same time, this could become the perfect proving ground. If Stefanski successfully connects with London's skill set, if Robinson's explosiveness is maximized, if the quarterback room feels unified instead of divided, then Atlanta becomes a case study in narrative redemption. It proves that controversial chapters don't define entire careers. But redemption requires precision, not just schematically, emotionally. One miscommunication in training camp can linger. One tense sideline exchange becomes GIF-ready content within minutes. Coaches used to operate behind a curtain. Now every gesture is recorded, every reaction dissected. That's the modern gamble. And perhaps the biggest risk isn't internal at all, it's timeline. The NFL doesn't wait for storylines to settle. By week 3, opinions harden. By mid-season, narratives cement. Atlanta doesn't have the luxury of a slow burn. They need visible alignment quickly. Because if they win early, this move becomes visionary. If they stumble, it becomes validation for critics. That's why this isn't just a coaching change. It's a test of evolution, a test of communication, a test of whether reputation truly dictates reality, or whether reality can still override reputation. Atlanta placed the bet. Now the entire league is watching to see if it pays off, or if the gamble exposes cracks that were never fully repaired. This story is bigger than one coach, bigger than one quarterback. What's unfolding here is part of a league-wide shift that's been building for years, and it's finally impossible to ignore. The NFL used to belong entirely to system coaches. For decades, the message was simple: fit the scheme or sit. Quarterbacks were molded to play within rigid structures. Offensive playbooks mattered more than individual flair. Coaches controlled narratives, careers, and leverage. If a young player struggled inside the framework, the conclusion was automatic: he didn't fit. But the power dynamic has changed. Today's stars enter the league with brand equity already built. Social media following, NIL-era exposure, national recognition before their first NFL snap. When a player like Shedeur Sanders arrives, he doesn't come in unknown, he carries influence. Cameras follow him. Conversations already surround him. That alters everything.
Because now, when a coach benches or limits that kind of talent, the debate doesn't stay contained inside film rooms. It becomes public discourse within hours. Analysts break down snaps, former players offer opinions, fans mobilize online. The old "trust the process" shield doesn't absorb criticism the way it once did. Coaches built their reputations on control. Star players now command visibility. And when those forces clash, it exposes tension in the modern league. There are still coaches who prioritize structure above all else. They believe discipline wins championships. They lean on repetition, hierarchy, and playbook precision. That philosophy has worked historically, but younger quarterbacks often thrive on freedom, on improvisation, on adapting outside design when necessary. The league itself reflects this shift. Look at offensive trends: more spread concepts, more RPO flexibility, more creative quarterback movement. The game favors adaptability now. It rewards dynamic playmakers who extend moments rather than strictly manage them. So when a coach appears resistant to tailoring a scheme around a generational talent, the question becomes unavoidable. Is the system protecting stability or limiting potential? That's not an accusation, it's a philosophical crossroads. Because player power is growing, contracts are structured differently, trade demands happen faster, public opinion sways front offices more than ever before. Teams can't afford to alienate emerging stars in a reputation-driven market, and young quarterbacks understand this leverage. They grew up in the digital era. They know branding matters. They know perception shapes opportunity. If they feel misaligned with leadership, they have more options and louder platforms than players did 20 years ago, which puts pressure on coaches to evolve, not abandon structure, not lose authority, but adapt communication, empower instead of restrain, balance accountability with visible support. The coaches who succeed long-term in this era will be the ones who blend discipline with flexibility. That's why the Stefanski situation resonates beyond Atlanta or Cleveland. It feels like a referendum on the old model. Can a strict, system-first approach coexist with high-profile, high-brand talent? Or does the modern NFL require customization around star players to survive? We're watching that battle unfold in real time. Because if Atlanta thrives under Stefanski, it reinforces the idea that structure still wins. But if friction emerges with young offensive talent, critics will argue that the league has simply moved past rigid frameworks. And here's the deeper layer. This isn't just about quarterbacks. It's about power, about control of narrative, about who shapes the direction of a franchise, the headset or the helmet. The NFL isn't abandoning coaching authority, but it's undeniably transitioning toward collaborative leadership models. Veteran quarterbacks demand say in play design. Offensive coordinators adjust systems weekly. Front offices weigh locker room culture alongside tactical ability. The era of "because I said so" coaching is fading, and in its place, a new expectation is rising. Prove you can maximize star potential without suppressing identity. That's the shift. Atlanta now becomes a test case inside this larger revolution, not because they chose controversy, but because controversy followed a philosophical debate already happening across the sport. System versus star, structure versus spotlight, control versus collaboration. The outcome won't just affect one franchise's record, it will signal how much the NFL's balance of power has truly changed. At the end of all of this, the wins and losses might not even be the most important part, because failure in the NFL can be fixed. A bad season gets reset, a losing record gets erased with the right draft pick. Even playoff collapses fade with time. But reputation? Reputation sticks longer than any box score ever could. Kevin Stefanski isn't fighting a stat line right now. He's fighting perception. And perception doesn't restart just because you change jerseys on the sideline. When the Atlanta Falcons hired him, they believed they were getting experience, structure, and leadership pedigree. On paper, that's exactly what they got, but layered on top of the resume is a storyline that refuses to disappear: the Cleveland chapter involving Shedeur Sanders. Fair or not, that chapter travels with him. The reality is simple. In today's NFL, you don't just coach players, you manage narratives. You don't just win games, you maintain trust in a hyper-connected ecosystem where every decision is analyzed within minutes. If Atlanta starts strong, the storyline flips instantly. The same voices questioning the hire will call it redemption. The system coach criticism turns into disciplined leadership. Reputation softens when results speak loudly enough. But if there's early turbulence, even minor turbulence, the word pattern will resurface. And that's what makes reputation harder to escape than failure. Failure is measurable. Reputation is emotional. It lives in how players feel inside meetings, in how fans interpret interviews, in how quickly doubt spreads when adversity hits.
What's happening right now isn't just about Stefanski proving he can win games. It's about proving he can connect, that he can empower star talent instead of appear to restrict it, that whatever tension existed before doesn't define how he leads now. Because this is the part nobody says clearly. Players don't follow playbooks, they follow trust. Lose that, and no scheme works. Regain that, and everything changes. Meanwhile, Shedeur Sanders moves forward untouched by public bitterness. He didn't wage a media war, he didn't escalate conflict, he focused on performance. That contrast sharpens the spotlight. One figure appears to have grown beyond the chaos, the other is still negotiating with it. And that's where this story becomes something bigger than a coaching change. It becomes a lesson. In the modern NFL, you can survive failure, you can even survive controversy, but surviving damaged perception? That requires intentional evolution. Atlanta is Stefanski's proving ground, not just to win, but to redefine how he's seen. Because right now, the question isn't whether he deserves a fresh start, it's whether the league is willing to grant it. The coming season won't just decide playoff positioning, it will decide whether Cleveland becomes a footnote or a permanent subtitle in his career story. And if there's one thing the NFL has shown time and time again, it's this: you can outrun a losing season. You can't outrun who the league believes you are.